Yeah.
Great.
I see that you are starting the video recording, Mankomal. Thank you so
Yes.
much. For colleagues who cannot attend due to a different time zone, I can see that François is present. We're very happy. I propose to start in order to be on time. So, Mankomal, I let you introduce.
Exactly. Thank you, Juliet. And hello, everyone. My name is Mankomal. So as the title of this conference suggests, why we are here, it's really amazing topic that we have. We celebrate International Women's Day to recognize social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. While it is celebrated annually on 8th of March, it is an ongoing journey that requires continuous dedication and action. So welcome to SIGN+Global Conference. Today, we are embarking a journey that aligns deeply with our social sustainability ambitions here at SCORE. The topic for today's session is why is gender equality everyone's matter? At SCORE, we hold DEI as a foundational principle forming one of the three pillars in of our Working Well Together program. This year, the the theme of this year for International Women's Day is Inspire Inclusion, which strikes a chord between our social sustainability goals. It really underscores our unwavering commitment to creating an inclusive environment where everyone, regardless of gender, background, or maybe identity, feels valued, respected, and empowered to succeed. Before we delve into the heart of today's discussion, I want to extend our sincere gratitude to François de Veran, our COMEX member of this enlightening series. Um, I'm I'm not sure if François had already joined us.
Yes,
Okay,
he's
that's
there.
great. So, François, first of all, thank you for your support and dedication, which is really instrumental in fostering an inclusive and diverse workplace culture at SCORE and really breaking stereotypes about the roles of men and inclusion efforts in this topic. Would you be so kind to share a few words with us before we begin our sessions today?
Yes, of course. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Maybe just I will be very brief, just a few words of introduction. I'm very proud, to sponsor this event or this conference today. This is indeed a deep conviction on my side. I think that embracing diversity in all its form, and again I repeat, in all its form, leads to I think first well-being for all of us, but also to strong collaboration and cooperation, and as a consequence, it leads to our collective success. So today, as you mentioned it's the International Women's Day, and we are going to focus on one form of diversity, gender diversity. As you know, we published last week all the org chart, at least direct report and N-2 by COMEC function. And I think this is not a chance or a pure coincidence. If you look at my org chart within finance, 42% of my direct reports and 43% of my N-2 reports today are female. So I think this is a testimony of my personal conviction and also choices I made many years ago to prepare this. So which means in each promotion or in each new recruitment. With this, I wish you a very nice conference.
Thank you so much.
François.
Thank you so much, Sonsa.
Thank
It
you.
really means a lot, and it's really ongoing, discussions and efforts into this topic in inclusion efforts as well. Thank you so much. Now it really gives me immense pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mark Freed. Mark stands as a trailblazer in realm of diversity and inclusion, bringing wealth of experience in invaluable insights on gender equity and allyship to our table today. So as co-founder of Men for Inclusion and industry expert and DEI trainer, Mark really emphasizes the critical importance of engaging every individual, like everyone, men and women, in our collective journey towards this gender equity. So Mark, the stage is yours. Without any further ado, I will like you to invite you to introduce yourself and begin the session.
Kamal and Francois and everybody, welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I just want to check before I start. You can see my slides on screen, can you? Everybody, it's all good. Fantastic. But before I get started, just three things I'd like to just bring to the table. First of all, obviously, this subject matter is about inclusion. And therefore, I think it would be a really good idea if we made this an inclusive meeting. Let's, please feel free to interrupt me, put questions in the chat, use the chat function, come on camera and, put your hand up. Let's make this interactive. Let's capture everybody's views and opinions. We will have a chance at the end for Q&A, but I'm quite happy if you want to raise a point during the course of my speech. The second thing is really backing up what Francois said. A lot of my conversation here is going to be about gender. And gender in a binary sense, men and women. I recognise, one, that there are lots of other genders and people identify in lots of different ways, but also there are lots of other diversity characteristics. And if you associate with one of those characteristics, again, please bring it to the table. Please chat. The other thing, and on this inclusivity point. Inclusivity is everybody on this call's responsibility. Diversity is often about policy, procedure, society, increasing the representation of those from underrepresented groups. And quite often, in our day-to-day lives, that's out of our hands. But inclusion is in our hands every day. Every minute of every day. It's our responsibility, and we as individual people and employees own that culture. It's our behaviours, our values that drive cultural change. Improving and developing our culture is in all of our interests. So yes, it makes good business sense, but it also makes good personal sense. We all win. This is not a zero-sum game for men. It's a win-win. So that's my start. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come on and just tell my story, my backstory, and how we formed and developed Men for Inclusion. And then talk about a few other things. One, the lived experience gap, talk about International Women's Day themes, and where we are on the journey, where men are on the journey. So without further ado, I'm going to tell my story. And I'm going to go right back to my childhood. I'm dyslexic, so my school days weren't particularly satisfactory. When I was at school in the 1970s, schools weren't particularly inclusive in their culture, and teachers taught in one way. They wrote on blackboards and pupils copied into exercise books. As a dyslexic, I didn't learn like that. I couldn't keep up with what the teacher was writing on the blackboard. And therefore, I failed miserably at school. I left school, and in fact, I was thrown out of school, if I'm honest, with absolutely no qualifications. But I had an absolutely amazing home life. My parents were both very active and had thrown away as much as they could in the 60s and 70s, the complying with male and female stereotypes. So they, in their latter years, both worked. My mum had a fantastic career. But equally, I was just as likely to see my dad getting involved and working in the home and in my upbringing. He was very active, and I was taught and learnt how to cook and clean and iron as much as I was taught how to change car tires and check oil and change light bulbs and plugs. So that was a very inclusive world. But then I started work in 1977 with no qualifications. I was a filing clerk, a post room boy. And what struck me straight away was when I walked around the offices in 1977, that there were rooms full of women. They were quite often the typing pool and the switchboard, and there were other rooms full of men. But in my role, I was able to climb the stairs to the management floor. Yep, the management in those days had a separate area where they all worked. They had their own car park, their own restaurants. And I met there a group of people who, frankly, were completely alien to me. But what I recognized and understood was that if I was going to succeed and flourish, that I probably needed to adopt their behaviors, their values. I needed to start looking like them and talking like them, because we're now into the early 1980s. That was the only way to proceed and to progress in those days. I did succeed, and 25 years ago, I found myself running a technology company that was owned by Credit Suisse. In that role, I had some and saw, and during my career, saw some of the challenges and some of the barriers that were put up to in front of my female colleagues. I was hyper aware of those because of my own background, but frankly, I did very little about them. I was on a charge. I was on a mission. I was programmed to be competitive and get to the top. During my time at Credit Suisse, I met a wonderful woman who became my wife. We were on the leadership team together. And one of the first things that Tina said about me was that I had two personas. I had the work persona and I had the home persona, the outside work persona. And Tina fell in love with thankfully, the outside work persona. Anyway, we finished our work at Credit Suisse when we sold the business, and Tina and I, at that point, had a little bit of time on our hands, and we set up an organization called E2W. And for the last 25 years, E2W has been supporting and helping women to flourish and succeed in their careers. And through that, and my early career as well, I've found and come to understand, as much as a man can, the experiences and the challenges that women face in their day-to-day lives in the workplace. We became hugely passionate about gender equality, and we did a lot of things. We've helped the UK government, for example, on their equality initiatives. But a few years ago, I was getting really frustrated at the pace of change. You could see in the stats that actually we weren't progressing very quickly. The financial services industry wasn't moving forwards, and in fact some firms were actually going backwards. And I came to question why that is, and what was going wrong, and how could we accelerate change. And I came to the conclusion that actually all of the work and all of the effort and all of the focus was always, if we're talking gender equality, was always on the women. And there were very few men passionate and driving and involved in the journey. And I didn't understand why, and begun to think and come to some conclusions about how we can engage and encourage more men to think of this topic and realize that it's a positive for them as well. It's not a zero-sum game. And with a group of other people formed this organization called Men for Inclusion. Men for Inclusion today works across a number of sectors, a number of industries, helping and supporting those firms to reach their inclusivity targets, reach their diversity targets by engaging men in this conversation, which I believe is so important. So that's my story and the formation of Men for Inclusion. For the rest of the session today, what I'd like to take you through is some of the thoughts, some of the ideas that we've come up with, some of the ways we go about our work, give you a taster for it. And that comes in really in probably in two parts. The first part is thinking about and talking about and understanding the lived experience gap, the difference between the male and female lived experience. The second part is really then thinking about why and where are men on the journey? Why are they where they are? And how do we engage them? How do we make them and help them think that this is good for them as well? What's in it for them? So without further ado, I'm going to come on to back to this idea of the lived experience gap. And what we've seen through our research, and this was done at Cambridge University by one of our co-founders, who did 4 years research, interviewed around about 7,000 people, men and women, across a number of industry sectors. And what Jill found was that there was a gap between the lived experiences of men and women in the workplace. And that our subsequent research has found that women typically have between a 15 and 30% poorer lived experience than men. Now that affects retention, it affects promotion, and those people reaching their potential and their ambitions, but also their performance. If you are affected by these, what we describe as accidental sexisms, then you're not having the same lived experience. Now, I should point out at this point that we're all subject to accidental sexisms. This isn't women are subject to them and men aren't. It's just women are more likely to experience them than men. So what are they? I hear you saying, what are they? Here they are, 16 things that are more or less likely to happen to women in the workplace than men. So these are things like being interrupted in meetings, having your ideas stolen, being given admin tasks rather than tasks that are appropriate to the P&L. Perhaps not having access, the same level of access to social networks, formal and informal. Not being, because of that, being promoted maybe only on past experience rather than on potential. Having assumptions made about you because you've just become a parent and what that might mean for your career and your desire to do things. Now, those assumptions may be correct, but unless we're talking and having those conversations, then we're not moving forward. I'm not going to labor these, they're on the screen. The point is that I think most women, I'm sure, on the call will understand and hear and recognize that these things are happening. A lot of men won't see them happening. And that's down to our culture, inclusivity, and just understanding these things. So to everybody on the call, what I would suggest and encourage you to do is make a note of these and go and talk to people. Go and see, are these things happening to you? Because all of our research, whatever company we work for, shows the fact that they are more likely to be happening to women than men in the workplace, and that's about our culture and about our inclusivity. So that's the first part. The second part I'd like to come on to is talk about, okay, where are men on the journey? And where do we want to get men to? And frankly, I as well, all of our research has shown that perhaps diversity and inclusion haven't treated men well. When we started talking about diversity, it naturally excluded most of us because the focus was on women. Then maybe we were called into a room and asked to do and invited to do, volunteered or not volunteered to do unconscious bias training, microaggression training. Maybe we then saw our firm make big commitments to gender equality and felt, actually, well, what's in it for me now? And maybe we were given targets and we saw our female colleagues being given leadership training. And maybe we're feeling a little bit left out, but also maybe a little bit blamed. And one of the things we see happening in a lot of organizations then, and in society more generally, is you get to this group of people who we describe as resistors. They're resisting further change. It's all gone too far. She only got the job because. And we need to understand and address those things. We then, moving along this chart, find that there's a group of people who are just reacting. Understand maybe it's career suicide not to be involved or adopt these behaviours and think it's job done because they've recruited another woman. We then come on to the more interesting side of the diagram, is where do we want to get people to? What do we want to achieve? And we call these and distinguish between allies and inclusion leaders. Now, our definition of an ally are those men, typically, who are helping and supporting their female colleagues and others from underrepresented groups to succeed, to flourish, but in the existing culture, with the existing behaviours. So using one of those accidental sexisms, not being heard or being interrupted in meetings, an ally may go to that woman and help and support, mentor, coach her to speak up in that meeting, which is a solution. But actually, we feel a better solution is to think about, okay, how do I make this meeting more inclusive? How do I ensure everybody in this meeting gets their voice heard in the way they want it to be heard? And that's inclusion. That's the difference between diversity and inclusion. and it's moving the culture forward. It's changing the way that we work. It's putting the mirror on ourselves and saying, let's move to a better world together. So how do we do that? And what's in it for men? Why should they be involved? Why should they think about being an inclusive leader rather than an ally, a passive or a resistant? And we've analysed this, and we've worked with men who are in all of these different camps. And what we notice is there are some differences. So there are a group of demotivators for men, and there are a group of motivators for men. So what are the demotivators? And what we've seen is that a lot of the things that we traditionally have done with diversity and inclusion is demotivating men to actually get involved. And that's maybe a pressure to engage. You've got to go on that program. You've got to do this. It's in your targets. Then there are some things like poor messaging that comes around this. Leaders saying, we've just signed this charter and we've now made a commitment to a certain percentage of women at certain levels. People have got to recognise that actually for a lot of people listening to that are thinking, what's in it for me? Well, is there any promotion prospects for me anymore? Being told off, being scapegoated, being told you're biased and aggressive. All of these things have demotivated men to get involved. And I have to say as well, there's a kind of a lack of role models out there in the world that men are more often than not portrayed in a lot of areas as the fighters, the people with the guns, the rapists, the murderers. It would be really wonderful, I think, if there could be some really great male role models in a more modern world. And in the office, in the work environment, I think that means men standing up and maybe taking paternity leave, maybe thinking about how they take the straitjacket off of complying with outdated male stereotypes. How do we do that? What are the motivators? Why are some men really engaged in this and others not? How do we engage men? And through our work, what we've found is changing the way the conversation is held, understanding that not all men are privileged. A lot of men identify, I myself identify with diverse characteristics because of my dyslexia. Others will have different reasons, working class backgrounds, whatever it is. Let's help them identify that actually the journey we've been on and the journey that we're continuing is actually good for them because of their diversity characteristics, and engage them in that. We also find then a lot of other men recognize and see the challenges that have been faced by their loved ones, their partners, women who have inspired them, and they've understood and seen the challenges and the barriers that they face through their daughters, say, or their wives or partners or girlfriends. And I think that for a lot of people becomes a light bulb moment of saying, actually, do I want those people I love to live in this world? We then come on to the next one, which is actually, let's think about, is this good for me? What's in it for me personally? And many men are beginning to realize that the inclusive world that we're all wanting to move into is great for them as well. It's a win-win. We do in this world have a lot more opportunity and choice than we've ever had. Yeah, we can make career choices. We can make lifestyle choices. We have life flexibility, career flexibility. We can choose to be the type of man that we want to be, not one that is dictated to us by society. That leads to better health and well-being outcomes for us, and also helps in our personal development. An inclusive workplace is a meritocracy, yeah, but it also gives us the opportunity to be involved in this. And most of the really senior leaders I talk to are inclusive leaders. So if we're not inclusive and we want to get to the top, the barriers for us are going to become greater. The final thing I'd say on this is that men have a responsibility. I think, if you look back through history, it's been, if we're just talking gender, it's been our female colleagues and women in our lives and our mothers and our grandmothers who have fought for and insisted on these changes and have moved the dial forward. Yeah. We've benefited from it. It's about time we got on board. It's about time we started to drive and leave a legacy for those that come after us. I'm going to come back now to we're celebrating International Women's Day here. I know it was a few weeks ago, but it's interesting. It's interesting to see how the themes of International Women's Day have changed over the last few years. So the themes used to be things like pledge for parity and be bold for change, press for progress. And these were quite forceful calls to action: break, challenge, press, be bold, pledge, that perhaps highlighted all the inequalities: bias, equal, better, progress. And I think the outcomes that were achieved from that were almost sort of a call to arms for women to go out there and change the world, change society. But in doing so, we're kind of holding men to account for everything that was wrong in the world. In recent years, the last couple of years, those themes have subtly changed. And this year, we're asked to inspire inclusion. And to me, that seems to be a much more intelligent action that builds awareness of the universal benefits of inclusion, and that we progress together. So to encompass that and to think about that, how have we changed and how has the world changed? I'm going to take you back to my mother and father's wedding day. They got married in 1957, the 1st of March, 1957. And it was a day that changed their lives in ways that, when young couples get married today, perhaps don't understand and don't realize. So on this day in March 1957, my mother lost her job. She lost her job because at that time in UK law, you could have an employment contract that said you lost your job the day you got married. And my mother had one of those contracts with a well-known high street bank. She lost her job. Her education, she tells me that the careers that were open to her at that time were, if she was clever, she could become a teacher, or a nurse, or go into banking and the local branch. If she wasn't clever, she could become a hairdresser. She was clever. She wanted to become a hairdresser, but her parents wouldn't let her, so she went into banking. Her travel was limited. She was limited by her background, but the day she got married, she became societal expectations: the homemaker, the cook, the cleaner, the mother. And the expectations from society were that she'd be a carer, should be domestic, should be obedient, should be grateful, should be subservient, emotional, loyal. Actually, all attributes that I put and associate more with my father than my mother. But my mother had to adopt those and be that type of person. When you look at it from my father's perspective, when he got married, his role suddenly became the sole provider, the head of the household, the protector, and the father, eventually, obviously when I was born. But even, his role as a father was very limited. He, for example, right from day one, he wasn't allowed anywhere near the hospital on the day I was born. Men weren't allowed to be involved in children's upbringings as much as they are today. And, as a father myself, I think, the world has changed to such an extent now that men can choose how they want to father and what fathers they want to be. But societal expectations on my father, that he'd be strong, successful, knowledgeable, unemotional leader, and as you expect, actually those characteristics were ones that I associated more with my mother than my father. Come then, and moving forward, I would suggest to you that over those last 60 or so years, women have taken a great leap forward. They've freed themselves of the stereotypes of complying with those societal expectations. They've reached the top of industry. They've become astronauts. They've invented vaccines that saved us from COVID. They've become airline pilots. They've become top sports stars. But also they have the choice and the opportunity to also be working mothers or to just be a mother. And all of that opportunity and choice has freed our female partners and loved ones from those restrictions that were put on my mother. But what I'd ask you to consider is, have men taken as much advantage? Are we behind our female colleagues, our female loved ones, in releasing ourselves from those male stereotypes? Are we taking advantage of the opportunities and choice that today's world gives us? And I would suggest, by and large, probably not. Now, when we start working and thinking and having dialogue with men about these subjects, what we hear is a group of quite inspiring stories. And we have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to share some of those with you. I'm going to talk about the football dad. This was a man that we were working with who talked passionately about how his two young daughters had been inspired by the Lionesses, the English female football team, women's football team, and wanted to go and take up football and wanted to enjoy that sport. So he took them down to the local football club and very quickly was pointed to a pitch that was the furthest pitch away from the changing rooms and the clubhouse. That was the one that got waterlogged. He noticed that they had the worst balls, the worst kit. They didn't have changing facilities. They didn't have referees. They didn't have the best coaches. And that inspired him to think, this is happening to my daughters. I want to ensure that the world they grow up into and the workplaces that they start in 10, 15 years' time don't hold those same barriers for them. And he started to look around and think about the barriers, the accidental sexisms, the lived experience gaps that his female colleagues were experiencing, and saw those and decided at that point that he was going to become a more inclusive leader. Another story is the quiz team participant. And to all of those people on the call who are maybe slightly skeptical about the accidental sexisms that I introduced earlier, this particular person was on one of our workshops and had expressed, like a lot of people do, some skepticism about whether accidental sexisms actually happened. And after the workshop, he went down, and that night the company were putting on a quiz night. He joined a team of four other men and one woman. And what he observed was that immediately the woman on the team was given the pen and the paper to write the answers down. She was given the admin task. And that sparked a light bulb moment for him that realized, actually, haven't we just been talking about that? He went back to work the next day and started conversations with his female colleagues, his wife at home, about, do these things happen? And what he found was that they did. And that changed his leadership style. He started becoming a more inclusive leader and changing the way he operated to get much better performance out of his team. The women in his team were more included. He changed the way he ran meetings. He ensured he shared his social time more appropriately and across the organization. So those are just some of the stories. Now, I'm going to finish in a minute, but one of the things I'm going to suggest is for people on the call, obviously go away and have a look at those accidental sexisms, but what can you positively do today? I think the first thing to do if we're thinking about changing culture is recognize that we're all human. We all make mistakes. But if we don't learn from those mistakes, if those mistakes aren't pointed out to us, then we're never going to move forward. So the first thing I would encourage you to do, go away from this meeting, is let others know you're happy to be called out. You're happy to be challenged. And if you are challenged, that you will act appropriately. Oh, it was just banter or it was just a joke isn't the answer. Yep. I'd also say, plan and prioritize further learning in this area. Yes, go away and have a look at the accidental sexisms, but be observant about things that are happening around you. Read books, Google things, watch films in a different way. The third thing is, I would say, is normalize inclusive group situations. Ask yourself, who do you go and talk to on a Monday morning? Who do you lunch with? Who do you have a drink with after work? Are all your work activities really inclusive? Share your social time more equally. Get to understand those people on the team who you don't perhaps know as well as others. And for those managers on the call, at your next group meeting, at your next management meeting, share this conversation with your team. Have a conversation about this with your team and understand exactly where they are. And help then create engagement channels to share those experiences. Keep learning from the people around you. Group mentoring sessions, group conversations around this are really important. And also then look and think about formal and informal routes to progress. So a few minutes late, but that's it from me. I don't know whether we have any questions. We haven't got any questions in the chat. I hope there will be some questions coming. Turn your cameras. Ask, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts? What are your questions?
Yes, thank you, Mark. And yes, as Mark's mentioned, feel free to type in your chat, like if you have any questions or any other things that you might to add into Mark's presentations as well. Feel free to add into the chat. But many thanks, Mark, for this insightful and thought-provoking presentation. And our colleagues are going to, I'm pretty sure that our colleagues are going to take a lot from this session. It was really an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you. Camille, you've come on screen. Suggest you want to ask a question, which is great.
Sure, but it's a tough one.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the presentation and all the insights. And I specifically like the accidental sexism that you quote, that hopefully this is a good way for everyone to, just be aware of what we do and recognize our mistakes and then learn from them. And I guess, they can apply in many ways as well. I guess my question, if I want to get there, looking that there's no other in the chat, is the story behind SIGN is, at first it was focusing on gender equity and it opened up to broader diversities. But still at first, and lots of people still have in mind that this is a women's club, if I exaggerate. And when people hear about this kind of conference, they believe it's a conference for women. So hopefully not everybody did. And I see a lot of men are here with us in the discussion. And I know we have very good allies. But still, if you can give us tips, on how to maybe open up the minds, specifically of those who, when they see the conference, they will not come.
Camille, I share sometimes. I regularly share your frustration. It was interesting. Obviously, we are talking about International Women's Day here, and I do a lot of keynotes and a lot of presentations like this, and I regularly see just a sea of female faces because it's International Women's Day. So when we get to November and we're supporting perhaps International Men's Day, I'm kind of sitting there expecting to see a sea of male faces, which of course is never true. And in fact, I've done International Men's Day events that have had more women in the audience than men. So yeah, how do we engage men in this conversation? And I come back to some of those earlier slides of the demotivators and the motivators. I think a lot of the language we've used and a lot of the points of discussion have disengaged men in this subject. They don't think it's about them. And I think particularly if we start talking, if the conversation starts from diversity, yeah, that has excluded men a lot from the conversation, almost by definition. When we start talking about inclusive environments and inclusive workplaces and inclusive societies, it strikes me that this is about us all, yeah? And we should throw away gender in a lot of the things that we're doing and a lot of the conversations that we have. Let's talk about how this world and an inclusive society and inclusive workplaces are good for us all. When men and women are asked what they want and what kind of societies and what kind of workplaces they want to work in, they come up with an amazingly similar set of priorities. So let's make the conversation about us all, rather than just about gender. And I think that's the way to engage men. Also, I hope, and I think that last part of my presentation, when we were talking about male stereotypes and female stereotypes, understanding and helping men to understand that actually this is great for them in terms of how they can behave, what the advantages are for them, and how the world has changed for them and will continue to change, and it will change a lot quicker with their help. This is about us all, everybody. Does that help, Camille?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah,
I truly agree.
Do you have I'm going to engage you in a conversation because nobody's put anything in the chat. How would you deal with that? How have you dealt with that?
I found that in regular discussions, quoting examples kind of open up everyone's mind, because it becomes, even though it could be someone else's story, it gets personal, and as such, I guess people start to open up and listen.
Yeah.
Actually, when we tackled Men's Day in November, I loved also the opportunity to discuss about the other kind of pressure men get from society and from the culture, and that those who actually want to become full-time parents, also struggle because the society expects otherwise from them. Yeah.
So that very black and white picture that I showed of my parents 60 years ago, I think men are freer now than they've ever been to be the type of man they want to be. Society is not dictating what a man is like it used to. As you say, once you start having that dialogue, and I'll give you an example. We were working with the exec team of a very large global insurance company, and we were trying to get the men around the table to open up and talk about this subject. And one of the men eventually, kind of rather sheepishly, put his hand up, and kind of hand on heart said, "I've got an admission to make." And we were all kind of, what's he going to say? And he said, that regular Wednesday morning call we have, and I can't, and I never make it in person. I'm always doing it from the car, and have done for the last couple of years. It's because I've just done the school run. I can't make it into the office, and the school run is really important to me. And he had never felt able to share that with his male colleagues, the people he worked with. They'd never had that type of conversation. And with him just saying that one thing and opening up, it completely changed the conversation around the table. these men who had worked together and played together for years were suddenly talking a different language. They were suddenly talking about inclusivity and what it meant for them, rather than diversity, and counting the number of people with diverse characteristics and from underrepresented groups in their business. They suddenly understood the what's in it for them.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much, Kemi, for your great question. So when we're coming to an end, like I can see there's no further questions in the chat, or like if somebody else wants to ask a question, you can just like raise a hand, or perhaps type your question in the chat. Otherwise, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you to take a moment to participate in our quiz on gender equity. I have left the link in the chat. The more participation we have, the greater impact. Score for Good will commit to a donation for Kalinga Linga Association with each participation. The charity introduced to us by one of our colleagues. It supports education of young girls in Zambia, providing them with better access to education and facilitate their social integration as well. But yes, I would also like to thank you, all of you, for engaging in this important dialogue today. Let's continue working well together to inspire inclusion and create a positive change in our workplace and beyond. And let's carry forward the spirit of today's discussions and continue to champion diversity and inclusion in all aspects to our professional and personal lives. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.